Good morning, everyone. Uh, so today we shall get started with, we'll just see how the runtime environment for a C-like programming language looks like. So in the last class we took a peek into the LLVM compiler infrastructure. Down the lane, if time permits, we will revisit that topic again. But today I will release a homework and I request you to do that homework carefully so that it gives you very good insight into uh, LLVM compiler infrastructure. More details about IR and how you can write an optimization pass, things like that. So yeah, look out for the homework today. And in today's session, we will see how a C program gets mapped to uh, a main memory image. So this is the summary so far. So if you, the compiler takes your source program and the front end of the compiler checks for syntactic and semantic checks, uh, looks for syntactic errors, and if there are no syntactic errors, it constructs an AST. On the AST, it performs on the AST, it performs a semantic analysis. And if there are no serious semantic issues are there, then the front end passes that ASC to a high-level code optimizer component. So not all compilers perform optimizations on the AST, but there are certain optimizations which make sense on AST. And there are some compilers which does optimize on the AST representation of the program. AST is abstract syntax representation of the program. After certain optimizations are done on the AST, the optimized AST is given to a low-level IR generator. So when we say low-level IR, for example, a sequence of 3 address tuples, or an IR which looks like LLVM IR, for example. And this is the phase 3 of your compiler project is this. How do you design this low-level IR? So, so phase 3 of your project is on this, designing this low-level IR. And once the IR, the low-level IR gets generated, then we can apply a sequence of optimization passes on this low-level IR. And these optimization passes are typically machine independent, like common sub-expression elimination, dead code elimination, program inlining, no function inlining, etc. And then the optimized IR is passed to the code generator module. And the code generator module, it can also do certain machine dependent optimizations, either before code generation or after code generation, or both. So all those things are possible. Some of the concerns for the code generator module, or what is the program layout? So, you know, like C program, it's a collection of files, and every file is a collection of functions. And there are some variables which are global, and there are some variables which are local. So where should memory be allocated to the functions? Where should memory be allocated to global variables, local variables, etc.? And how do we handle procedure calls? How do we pass parameters? How do we get return values? All these are concerns of the code generator module. And the code generator per se need not worry about how to take care of if statement, for statement, while statement, etc., because these abstractions are already lowered. They are already flattened out. So the code generator module, it need not worry about these constructs. And if the compiler is for a object-oriented programming language such as C++ or Java, there are many other concerns that needs to be, there are many other issues that needs to be addressed, like how do we do function binding, virtual functions, inheritance, and there will be few other problems which we need to address if we are compiling a object-oriented programming language like C++ or Java. After few classes, we will try to take a look into the runtime environment for object-oriented programming languages, specifically C++. But not in the next class. In the next class, what we will do is we will move on to the code generator module. So this is the storage layout of a program, logical storage layout of a program. So your program consists of a collection of functions, a C program, for example. So there will be one section called as code section or code segment, where the instructions associated with all the functions will be stored. And there will be a separate section called as a data section or a data segment, where memory for global variables and static local variables are stored. And there is a heap segment where memory, dynamic memory allocation happens from the heap. That is, when you use malloc and free library calls to allocate and delocate memory dynamically, then that memory comes from this heap. And then there is a stack which grows and shrinks as the program executes. When a function gets called, associated with that function, there is what is called as an activation record. And that activation record contains many lot of information which supports the execution of that program. Like the activation record contains the memory for the parameters, the memory for local variables, and things like that. So if you see the main memory layout for a program on a Linux operating system. So, like when you compile your program, your a.out executable is present on the hard disk. When you give that program for execution, a main memory layout for that program will be created, and your program starts executing. The typical address space layout, this is what is called as an address space layout, and for a program, for a Linux process, looks like this. So this is the whole address space, starting with the lower address 0x0, and the higher addresses are present here. So the addresses are growing from bottom to top. And you can see there is a kind of unused space. And if I am right, so this unused space is this unused space could be for BIOS. This unused space is reserved for BIOS, where and this BIOS is present in the flash RAM or ROM. And then your operating system is mapped to the higher address space. So this is the kernel, this is the Linux kernel, is mapped to this part of the address space of the process. And your instructions of your functions, they will be present in this read-only segment. So this is called as text section, and there is some, so constant literals are present in, so I think in the read-only section .ro data. Anyway, so but for the, you can kind of for the time being not worry about it, but what is important for us is this text section, where the instructions of your program are present. And this is write protected. So if you try to modify your own section, like for example, like you have a function fun, and that no fun in C programming language, it's actually a function pointer, and you can call from main fun like this, if I'm right. So you can call uh, so like this, but if you try to modify, like for example, if you try to say fun is equal to something, or star fun is equal to something, so fun points to some memory address, like for example, this is your program, and let me, yeah. So this is your program. So this is your main memory. In the main memory, for example, so here the instructions of fun are present. The instructions of program fun are present. And so when you try to do something like star fun is equal to something, like fun points to the first instruction of this fun function. So when you try to do star fun is equal to something, then you are actually trying to modify an instruction of fun. Or even if you do something like star of fun plus I, then that means you are trying to modify some instruction which is at an offset I from fun. If you try to do it, then also you get into trouble, because this segment in which these instructions of fun are present, so this is present in dot text segment, and this is read only. The operating system marks it as read only, so you cannot uh, modify it. And then stack grows from higher addresses to lower addresses, and the top of the stack is always pointed to by a stack pointer register. And then there is a heap, and a stack and heap grow in the opposite direction. And this heap is used by the malloc library. And in between, so you have shared libraries are mapped in between. It is possible for multiple processes to kind of map to the same shared library code. Uh, so, so what we have here is, this is how the address space layout or virtual address space layout of a Linux process looks like. So this is a different view. Again, this is how the virtual address space layout of a Linux process looks like. So the top, here you have the kernel. This chunk of memory is allocated to the Linux kernel. And then here you have this unused space. And then you have the text segment, data segment, BSS segment. And yeah, this we kind of missed previously. So after the text segment, we have the data segment and BSS segment. We will see, so usually what happens is, BSS segment consists of those global variables which needs to be filled with zeros. They will be present in the BSS segment. Uh, and and then stack is growing in this direction, and heap is growing in this direction. And I want you to pay attention to this. There is this random stack offset, and this random stack offset is there to kind of beat a buffer overflow attack. There's something called as buffer overflow vulnerability. I will post a reading assignment on that in today's homework. In order to beat that, I think randomizing the base of the stack helps to some extent. Because of that, if you run your program and print the address of a local variable, every time you run the program, the address of the local variable will be a little bit different, because local variables are allocated memory on the stack. And since the base address of the stack is randomized a bit, so every execution of your program, it gives a different address to the local variables. And we call it as a virtual address space as against physical address space. As you know, like the actual physical RAM is something, this is a physical entity, but every process has a virtual address space, and this virtual address space, or which this virtual address layout, is created from the executable that is present on the hard disk. So this memory layout for process 1, which is executing the program, or which is hosting the program file A, so it gets mapped to the physical RAM. A page here, it gets, for example, mapped to some page here in the physical RAM, and a page, some other page may get mapped to something else in the physical RAM, so on and so forth. Similarly, if you see, uh, this is the virtual memory address. This is a virtual address layout, virtual memory layout for process 2, which is hosting the program file B. And so different pages in this virtual memory address layout, they get mapped to different physical pages in the physical. So because of that, so like for example, the text segment could be present here in the lower address space of the virtual memory, but when it goes to the actual physical address space, there is no constraint. It can be mapped to anywhere. So there is no such constraint. The second thing here is we were talking about shared uh, memory, no, shared library, space for shared library. Uh, yeah, like for example here, memory mapping segment. So here, if I am right, like for example, uh, let's say hypothetically speaking, this is your shared memory segment here for process 1, and this is the shared memory segment for process shared library. This is shared library. This is also shared library. I think maybe it is possible for these two shared library pages to get mapped to the same physical page. Because if you see the code, there is a lot of commonality. You unnecessarily end up wasting a lot of uh, code, a lot of physical memory. So if we can map the virtual pages associated with them to the same physical pages, then you save on memory. This logic also applies to not only shared library. If you take, for example, Chrome browser, you can have 30 tabs of Chrome browser. All the 30 tabs of Chrome browser, the text segment could be common, because they are all coming from the same program, and they can possibly share the same physical page. Because if you go look at do a PS minus AEF for HTOP, you will see there are many threads associated with different Chrome tabs possibly. And if all of them, if the text section of all these Chrome threads, if they share the same physical pages, then we will save on the memory requirements that we put on the RAM on your system. So now let's take a look at where memory is allocated to global variables versus local variables, like versus static local variables, etc. So let's share my whole desktop. Yeah. So this is the code that we have, and let's compile this code, and we will try to understand many things as we compile this code. So I'm compiling this code using -s option so that a dot s, the assembly code for this will be generated. So if you look at this assembly code associated with this global.c, the C program, you can see that that num array is allocated memory in the text, sorry, yeah, in the data section. If you see the data section, in the data section, num array is allocated memory. This is the, so this is the data section. So in the data section, num array is allocated memory. And in fact, since we have initialized num array to specific values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you can see that from line 9 to 9, from line 9 to line 10, you can see that memory, the assembler is allocating space uh, for 10 elements, and each of those, and how each of those elements should be initialized, that information is also given. So when an executable a.out is created, and when we give this a.out for execution, the main memory map for your process is created using these guidelines. That is, we have to allocate a sequence of 40 bytes, and the first byte should be initialized to 1, second byte should be initialized to 2. All this information will be present in your a.out, and when your program is given for execution, it will be, that information is used to create a main memory layout for your program. The second thing you will see is your num array is declared global, if I am right. So this num array is visible to a function which is written in a different file. Like when you are writing your whole program, if your whole program is spread across multiple files, unless we kind of make this thing into static, its scope is the whole program. So because of that, that information is specified by using this qualifier dot global. The assembler is saying, you know what, dot global, so this num array is visible to a function which is written in some other program. But I think if we make this static, then that means the scope of this variable num array is restricted to this file, in which case that global declaration may not be present. So let's compile this program and see how it looks like now. Yeah. So now if you go see num array is that dot global num array declaration is not there. So earlier we have this dot global, uh, that this declaration num array is there. Now it is not there, because we are restricting the scope of the variable num array to this file. Great. So let's come back here. Let's go back to the original code. Yeah. So now you can see that after removing that static qualifier, so again num array has become global, saying it's visible to functions written from different in a different file. All right. And then, so now the memory for local variables sum and I, it is not allocated in the data section. It is not allocated in the data section. Let's say along with this, we have something like int a of 100, for example. Let's see. We are not using it, but let's say if it is there, and let's see what happens. So if you see, yeah. So A is a variable, which is, it's a global variable. In C, all global variables, I guess, if they are not specifically, explicitly initialized, they will be initialized to zeros. So later on, we will see that the memory for the variable A will be allocated in what is called as a .bss section. All variables which will be initialized to all variables which will be uh, so all variables will be initialized to uh, which are initialized to 0, they will be present in this .bss section. So we are not seeing this .bss section explicitly in this program, but I am guessing that when we do an obj dump and take a look at the code, we will see that .bss section. So let's go back here again. So sum and I, they are local variables. They are not allocated memory in the global data section. And then you can see the function. These are the instructions associated with main. The instructions associated with main, they are present in the text section. They are present in the text section. And the scope of the function main, it is also global. That is, it is visible to outside this file also. So, and the instructions of main, they are present here. And you can see, in order to see how this sum and I, they are allocated. Just 1 minute, please. In order to see how sum and I are allocated, where they are allocated memory and how they are accessed, it is better to do a obj dump and disassemble the code. So gcc -g global.c. Actually, let me do one thing also. Just for the sake of simplicity. This doesn't make any sense, but I just want to make a point. So in order for that, I'm introducing the dummy statement. So if you see this, this is the disassembly of the object file or the a.out file associated with global. And you can see, like, for example, control F BSS. You can see in the disassembly, when we disassembled this code, you can see there is a BSS section in which memory for the variable count and the array A are allocated. Because yeah, uh, because they are initialized to zeros, they are global variables, they are initialized to zeros. Because of that, they are allocated memory in this BSS section. Now let's look at the data section. So you can also see there is a read-only data. If you use any constants, they can be kind of initialized in this read-only data. Any string literals or anything, they could be present here, possibly. And this is the data section. And in the data section, memory for num array is allocated. This is the virtual memory map for this for the process associated with a.out. And you can see in the data section, num array is allocated memory here 1, 2, 3, 4, and it is allocated 4 bytes. If I am right, 20, yeah, it is allocated 4 bytes. We can see this is yeah, so this is 4 bytes. So ignore this column. So just focus on this. Okay, so it is allocated 4 bytes in the data section. Each element is allocated 4 bytes. In case if you are wondering, so if you want to get so this 01, it is present in the address 20 ending 20, and this so if you kind of take this whole thing and split it into, like this one is allocated 4 bytes. So one, so this is 01, this is 00 in hexadecimal 00. So this whole thing is equal to 1. And the address associated with this is 20, the least significant 2 digits. And the address associated with this is 21. The address associated with this is 22. And the address associated with this is 23. That is how that one got laid out in the memory. So in case if you are wondering what's going on there. And let's keep going. Disassembly. Okay. So now let's look at main. So where main is present. This is where, so main is present in the text section. This is where main is present. And you can see, so the way the variable, so the sum is a local variable. Sum is a local variable. The way in which the global variable count is accessed is, so what we are doing is count is moved to a register EAX, and the contents of register EAX is moved to the variable sum. This is the address of the variable sum. Sum is residing at a negative offset of 8 bytes from what is called as a base pointer register. So this is how the count variable is accessed. The way count is a global variable, the way count variable is accessed is different from the way the local variable sum is accessed, because local variables are present on the stack and we have to use stack relative offset addressing. So we will see this more about this base pointer register in a while. And you can see this is the for loop, and just look at sum is equal to sum plus num array of 5. So again, so wherever you see, and I is a local variable, I is a local variable. So since I is a local variable, it is also allocated memory on the stack, and it is accessed using certain offset from the base pointer register. So what I would like you to make a note is the variable I is allocated memory on the stack, and it is at an offset 0x4 from the base pointer register. And the variable sum is allocated memory on the stack, and it is allocated at an offset 8, negative offset 8 from the base pointer register. All right. And in C, you have what are called as static local variables. And static local variables, their lifetime is throughout the execution of the program. Static int count is equal to 0, and count plus plus. So usually if count is just if there is no static qualifier for count variable, then count is a local variable and its lifetime will be gone as soon as we come out of the increment count function. Okay, so this idea of scope and lifetime, I hope you are aware of it. So there is a scope and there is a lifetime. The scope of a variable and the lifetime of a variable. So if you see the global variable num array, its lifetime is throughout the program execution time. The lifetime of the num array, it is throughout the program execution time, and its scope is the whole of this program. And if you want to constrain the scope of num array to this file, you want to put a static qualifier before its declaration. But if you look at a local variable such as, let's say I have one more variable here, which is int temp. If you look at the variable temp, the variable temp, its scope is within this function, and its lifetime is also the duration of the function's lifetime. That is, you call increment count, temp becomes active, and after increment, we return from the increment count, temp is no longer available because its lifetime is over. But whereas if you look at this static int count, this count variable, its scope is still this function, because you cannot use count outside this function, but its lifetime is throughout the program execution, because we would like to be able to recall or be able to retain this count across function invocations. So since we want to have this, since we want to maintain the count across the value of count across function invocations, we want to allocate memory to it in the global data segment. So let's compile this program and see what happens. See, now count's scope is count is no longer in this is no longer a global variable, and it is within this function, so it is not visible in the main. So let's remove this because we don't need it in. So let's look at this thing. So let's see where memory for count is allocated. You can see count is allocated memory in the .bss section because count is initialized to 0 to start with. But if count is initialized to, let's say, 1 instead of 0, then maybe count will go to the data section. Yeah, so now you can see count is allocated memory in the data section along with num array because count is initialized to a certain value. But if you see the temp, the code for temp is allocated memory on the stack. If you see temp, so let's see the code for increment count. Yeah, so this is the code for increment count. And if you see the code for increment count, so the way, so this is, so since count is present in the global data section, the particular way in which this is accessed is different. The particular way in which this is accessed is different. And here we are not referring to temp at all. So because of that, you don't see any access to temp. Let's see what happens if we have some code associated with temp, because then you will see clearly see that temp is allocated memory on the stack. Let's say temp is equal to count plus plus. Yeah, now you can see that increment in this increment count function. So this is an access to variable temp. This is an access to variable temp. We are writing something into variable temp, and the address of variable temp is at a negative offset 4 from the base pointer, register. This kind of the purpose of all this exercise is to see how different entities in your uh, program, they are allocated memory. Where will be the where will memory be allocated to the instructions of the functions that are present in your program? Where will memory be allocated to the global variables, to the local variables, static local variables, etc.? That's what we were trying to do by looking at this example. So now let's go back and move further here. Can you see the slides now? Just want to double check. Are you with, can you see the slides? Okay, great. So let's keep going. And so when from main, let's say if you call any function, generally whenever you call a function, associated with that function, there is what is called as an activation record associated with that function. So if you see, this is let's say there is a function f which is the currently active. Is a function f that is let's say this is main called a function fun. So this is the activation record associated with main, and this is the activation record associated with fun. Let's say this is the activation record associated with fun. And the activation record contains, like for example, the EBP register. So because before this activation record got pushed onto the stack, there is a previous activation record, and the EBP register is pointing to the base of the activation record. And the stack pointer is pointing to the top of the activation record. So when this function fun is called, we don't want to lose out on the previous EBP. So what we do is we store the previous EBP, old EBP here in the current function's activation record, and memory for local variables is created, and ESP is pointed to the top of the activation record. So here, remember stack is growing in the opposite direction. So when we push an activation record, we kind of go downwards. So here ESP is pointing to the base, EBP is pointing to the base of the activation record, and ESP is pointing to the top. And remember, these are higher memory addresses and these are lower memory addresses. So because of that, in the code that we have seen, in the disassembly, we have seen that we are using negative offsets when we are accessing local variables related to EBP. And the question is, why do we want to use EBP? Why can't we just use ESP, stack pointer register? So if you use stack pointer register, so since stack pointer is pointing here and the addresses are growing in this direction, the offsets will be positive. They will not be negative. And we can possibly free up the EBP register and use it for some other purpose. But the problem is, like, for example, if you try to allocate memory on the stack dynamically using function calls such as alloc, just like malloc, alloc allocates memory dynamically, but instead of allocating memory from the heap, it allocates memory from the stack. When we allocate memory from the heap, if you don't free it, then what happens is it is possible that you may end up getting into a memory leak situation. But if you allocate memory on the stack, as soon as you come out of that function, then immediately what happens is the memory that got allocated, it gets automatically released because the whole stack pointer gets popped out. So that is the advantage if you allocate memory on the stack versus heap. But it may not be possible on that all the time, because many times you want to create data structures which should persist throughout the lifetime of the program. If you create a linked list using a sequence of alloc calls, then you may get into trouble because as soon as you are out of the function, the whole linked list can possibly get destroyed, and it's not a good thing for you. Depending upon the program context, it may or may not be a good thing for you. All right. So the question is, why can't we allocate memory to all the local variables in the data segment? The problem is, it's not, if you allocate memory to all the local variables in the data segment, then, when there is a recursion, it becomes an issue. Like for example, main, you're calling a factorial function. Okay, you call factorial of n minus 1, and factorial of n minus 1 will call factorial of n minus 2, and all the variables, all the local variables used by factorial n minus 1 and n minus 2, if memory is allocated on the global data segment, they will be accessing the same memory location, and so they will interfere with each other's execution. By having the memory allocated on the stack, each invocation of the factorial function, it have its own activation record, and then it can take care of it. Okay, it can have its own activation record. So because of that, they don't interfere with each other. Great. So let's keep going. So later on, so at the end of today's session, I will show one small example using this activation record and GDB, and how you can see how things are handled, how the activation record looks like, and how we can, using GDB, we can move up and down in the stack frame visiting different activation records. So the second important thing associated with functions, implementing functions or procedure abstractions is how do we pass parameters and return values. So like there are multiple mechanisms, parameter passing mechanisms. One is call by value mechanism, other is call by reference, the third one is call by name. Call by name, I think it's no longer used. Call by value and call by reference are there. In C, we use call by value, and C++ permits call by reference too. So in call by value, you just copy the values to the parameters, and after that, the parameters are kind of disentangled with the function calling it, and the function, the called function carries out the execution and returns a value. In call by reference, you kind of pass a reference to the original variables, and whatever happening in that function, they will be reflected in the original memory locations. So let's see how call by value mechanism is implemented in C-like programming languages. So with number one, we can pass these parameters through registers or through the stack or through the base. In this particular example, so where when the compute function is being called, this is the activation record associated with the compute function. It kind of starts from here, and it kind of ends from here. And temp and n, they are allocated memory on the stack. Temp is at a offset, negative offset 4 from EBP, and n is at a negative offset 8 from EBP. And the parameters, the function that is calling compute, it is pushing the parameters on the stack. So if compute wants to access the parameters A and B, it can use a positive offset of 8 and 12 to access the parameters A and B. But usually in C, in most cases, in C, in most architectures, what happens is if the number of parameters are less than or equal to 4, you want to pass the parameters through registers. And if the number of parameters are greater than 4, let's say if the number of parameters are 7, the first 4 parameters will be passed through registers. The rest of the 3 parameters will be passed through stack. So that is a typical strategy that is used in practice. So usually if the number of parameters are less than 4, you don't see, usage of stack to pass these parameters. And the return values are again typically passed through a register. Like for example, if I am right, the return values on an x86 64 architecture with on Linux operating system, with high probability, we have to check the manual. So it passes the return value in an EAX register. So if you see, this is the anatomy of a stack frame. So you have the previous, this is the activation record of the callee function, and this is the activation record of the called function. And this function, when it is trying to call some other function, it pushes the parameters and then, and then it calls the function. And when you call a function, you need to know where you should be returning to after you call that function. So the return address is also typically stored on the stack. Okay, like for example here, so at some point this is the code for main. So you're executing here, you have a call fun. No, the code for fun is present here, and the code gets executed. When you do a return, so the control should transfer back here. So this return address in many architectures, it is stored on the stack. But there are other architectures which kind of handle it in a different way. So, but in any case, we can store the return address that is there after the call function on the stack, and you can pop it out so that you can transfer the control back from here to here. And so the next important question is when a function calls, when a function foo calls another function fun, uh, so what happens? Because foo uses some registers, so foo calls fun. In the process of execution, foo, when it is calling, foo could be using some registers, and fun also could be using some registers. Okay. So if let's say foo is using the registers EAX and EBX, and foo calls fun, and fun is also using those registers EAX and EBX, then what happens is after you return from fun to foo, the values that are stored in EAX and EBX gets destroyed, and fun could lead to an incorrect execution. So in order to, we need to solve this problem. Uh, so how do we solve this problem? One way of solving this problem is the function, the foo, before calling fun, it saves all the registers which it likes to be preserved across the function call. So foo, this is solution one, saves all the registers that need to be preserved across the procedure call on the stack. And after the control transfers back from fun back to foo, then foo restores those values from the stack and continues its execution. This mechanism is what is called as a caller saving mechanism. The function which is calling, it is taking care of preserving the registers across a function call. The second approach is the function fun, before it uses the registers, all the registers that it is using, it saves the registers it is using on the stack and restores them later. This is the strategy used by the in the callee saved. This strategy is what is called as a callee save approach. Sorry, this is not coming out clear here, but in practice what happens is the whole set of registers will be divided into two banks, and one bank is called as a caller saved registers, and other is called as a callee saved register. So that means so registers which fall in the caller saved bank, what happens is it's the job of the caller to save them and restore them across a function call. And the registers which fall in the callee savvy bank, it is the job of the callee to preserve them before it returns back to the caller. So where this kind of strategy works, for example, is, for example, main is calling fun and fun is not calling any other function. So fun is kind of a leaf function. So when it is a leaf function, for fun, it makes sense to use the caller saved registers first, because caller is anyway preserving those registers. So there is no point if fun uses the registers falling in the callee saved bank, then it has to save them and restore them, because it has to assume that main could be using those registers. So what fun may want to do is it may just want to use the registers falling in the caller saved bank. And if it runs out of them, then it can use the registers from the callee saved bank. But it has to make sure that before it uses them, it saves them and restores them. But interesting thing here is all these things of caller savvy, callee saved, all these conventions, they are important only when you are trying to interface with external C libraries, or when you are trying to work on a big project with 20 different people and you need to have a convention. Otherwise, it will be a whole mess. But if you are writing a small program, just like in a CS, like in your CSO course with 2, 3 functions, then you can use your own conventions and try to figure things out. But on the contrary, if you are trying to work in a large group, then you have to arrive at your own standards, number one. The other case is, the whole set of C libraries, when you call printf, printf expects parameters to be passed to it in a certain way. Similarly, it returns the return values in a certain way. So all the C libraries, they follow a certain convention. And this convention is dependent upon the language. Uh, it depends on the operating system and the architecture. And all these things, they fall under what is called as an application binary interface manual. So this is the thing to look at. So when you're trying to work, build a compiler, build a linker, or try to write a library on a new uh, operating system plus architecture, you need to have this ABI defined. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Like for example, for your let's say if you are doing a code generator, and you want to, and in your code generator you are permitting your no, like for example your mini C to call to use the C libraries, then you need to know in which registers you should be passing parameters, and you need to know from which registers you should be extracting the return values. So to summarize, so the global variables, they are present in the data segment. Uh, the local variables, they are present on the stack. Parameters are passed using a combination of registers and stack. Return values are returned through registers, and the memory that is allocated using malloc, it is allocated on the heap. So this whole chunk, this is present in the heap. So when you construct for example, a linked list, which is whose head, you have a head variable which is pointing to the head of this the linker list. The main memory map looks something like this. And when will memory leak happens? So let's say if you return from your function without freeing the memory, without traversing this linker list and allocating all this the memory for each of the nodes, then this link gets destroyed because you return from the function and the local variable no longer there. You lost track of this whole linker list is dangling in the heap memory, and you don't know how to release it because you lost track of the handle to it. And these kind of things will lead to memory leaks. Okay. So that's the summary for today's lecture. And so what we didn't look at specifically is, like, for example, in Java kind of programming languages, in order to avoid the memory leak problem, so no free the memory which is no longer referenced, it is automatically collected. So that is the garbage collection module. So we don't, in C, we don't have a garbage collector. In C++ also, I don't think there is no garbage collector. So, but we are not studying garbage collection in this course. And runtime environment for object-oriented languages like C++. Uh, as I said, if time permits, maybe after a few classes, we will revisit this topic and try to study this. And yeah, so that's all we have. This is the summary of runtime environment for C-like programming languages. So just I know, like I'll just take few more minutes. So those of you who can stay, you can stay. I want to show you how you can use GDB nicely to uh, to traverse the stack frame. Let's look at this code. Now let's write a small program. Okay, so hash include std.h int fact int n. If n is equal to 1, return 1, else factorial is equal to n star factor n minus 1, return factorial. Let's say I use fact 4, fact of 6. Okay, so now let's see if it works actually, and then if it works, then I will fact.c. We are not printing it. Okay, so factorial is equal to percentage. Yeah, so now let's try to use GDB and see what is happening. So GCC minus G fact.c GDB a.out. So break fact run. So now we are in TUI enable. So now we are on line 7 here. If we do a BT, then you know the stack says, so GDB says on the stack, we have main, and then if you go one level, and then on the top of main, the activation record for fact with n is equal to 4 is present. So now if we continue, then you can see, if you do a backtrack, you can see main is calling fact with n is equal to 4, and fact is calling fact again with n is equal to 3. And if you go up, so you will enter the activation record associated with fact with the parameter n is equal to 4. And if you print the local factorial, it is some random value, because we called n times fact 3, and the factorial is not yet initialized to anything. So when we print it, it is printing a random value. So now we are back to where n is equal to 3, and we do a continue. And if you do backtrack, you can see that no, on the stack, main is calling fact with n is equal to 4, fact is calling fact with n is equal to 3, and fact is calling fact with n is equal to 2. Again, we continue. So you do a BT, you see that fact is called with n is equal to 1, and you do a next, it will be written. Okay, so now if you see what is the value of the factorial. So the value of the factorial, now we are in fact 2 at the end. So the value of the factorial, the local variable, is 2 because this got executed. But if we go up and look at the activation record associated with the invocation of fact, with the parameter n is equal to 3. And when we print factorial, then yeah, it is giving 0. It could be 0, it could be some random value or whatever it is. Let's see if we go up and see print. Yeah, now it is a random value. So you can see each of the invocations of the fact, they have different addresses, different addresses. And if you see print address of factorial, so this is some address. And if we go here again, and if you print the address of factorial, this is a different address. And if you take the difference of these two addresses, you can get an estimate of the activation record length for the fact function. Okay, and then continue. You get factorials. Anyway, so the idea here is, now if you look at the stack, so we went deep into the stack. Now we are unwinding and popping the activation records and coming back to main. So using GDB, it is possible for you to play and understand how these activation records work, and how the stack frame looks like. And you can move up and down in this stack frame to understand different function calling contexts. That's all I have for today's, and thank you. If you have any questions, we can ask me.